Relationships are a core component of our mental health or our well-being. And relationships play a profound role in how we feel and how we're doing inside. Today, we're going to have a conversation around the nuances of relationships and how they affect our well-being positively and negatively. But let's start with this. How are relationships connected to mental health? Because sometimes when people think about mental health, they think of kind of a myopic, my mind, what I think, but mental health is a very broad category. And underneath the umbrella of mental health includes our social relationships, our relationship with our society and culture, but the people that are close to us, the people that deeply influence our life on an everyday basis. And I think when I think of like these factors of relationships, I think we have multiple circles, kind of like Jesus did. He had 3 people who were deeply close to him. Then he had 12. That was another circle. Then he had 70. And then he had friends all over the place as he traveled around Israel. That's the same with our life. But the people that are really close to us in proximity, they can influence our life positively or negatively. And our interactions with them can have profound effects on our flourishing or can be destructive in our life. And I think that's an important thought to process through when we're connecting mental health and relationships together. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts around this connectedness with mental health and human relationships.
Yeah, I can jump in. I think relationships are so powerful in multiple ways. First, we all think about early childhood relationships and how those early childhood relationships with caregivers create this blueprint for love or relating with others. Some people might call that an attachment style or an internal working model. But the love we experience from our relationships early on teaches us how to relate to ourselves, how to relate to others, how to relate to the world. And then from that point on, we're just picking up information from the other relationships that come into our lives. We're learning everything from, funny phrases. I know we've all heard kids repeat adults and had really good laughs about it, to learning things like how to, share how we're feeling, how to forgive someone when they've hurt our feelings. To as we get into adults from relationships, we learn professional skills. We learn personal skills. We learn how to work towards meaning and purpose together, how to volunteer together. So there's so many different types of relationships, but if I could create a summary statement for the importance of them, all of the research on relationships shows it is deeply important to our wellness and mental health as a whole. So important, in fact, that there are some studies that have said it's the number one predictor of resilience.
Wow. That's really good.
Yeah. I would say relationships are core and essential to life. If you think about going all the way back to Genesis, the first thing that God says is not good is for man to be alone. So there's, a foundational thing from Scripture there that makes the point that we were made and built for relationships. And when they're flourishing, our lives are going well. But when we have some tension between ourselves and someone who's close in our circle, man, it really makes life difficult. It's been said for parents even that you're only as happy as your saddest child. And I think that just speaks to our interconnectedness and how we were built for relationships. So it is, I would say, the number one factor probably that determines how well our mental health is going.
Yeah, just that point, we are built for relationships, and we've said this almost in every episode, is the multi-systems that exist inside of us and how those biological, psychological, social, spiritual, and how all of those systems impact each other. So from the social aspect, we are designed to be relational. When we are not having healthy relationships, the other areas of our bodies respond to that. When we experience stress and all of a sudden our body is responding to stress and producing stress hormones. When we are in good relationship with people and we're feeling really good about the community that we're in, our bodies respond to that as well and produces hormones that are actually healing and helpful to us. So it's almost like an inner accountability system where we're supposed to be in good relationships with people around us so that we can function in wellness.
Yeah. I want to highlight the verse that you mentioned, Genesis 2:18, is not good for man to be alone. A lot of people read that and they're like, oh, that's marriage. You need a partner. No, at the core level, that has nothing to do with marriage. That verse is the first time in God's creation, before sin, before people departed away from God's, word and direction and design and authority. God said, everything in creation is perfect. Everything's good. Genesis 1:31, everything was good that God had created. And then he looks down and he says, no, something's missing. Human beings created in my image and likeness don't have relationships. I'm a relational being. Therefore, we have to be relational beings.
Right.
So there was a void, which leads me to believe that we can't flourish in isolation. We cannot flourish doing life alone. However, loneliness is interesting because loneliness is not the absence of relationships. Loneliness is the absence of relationships with the material that God designed. What do you mean by that? Here's what I mean. Loneliness is the absence of mutually meaningful relationships. That's what God designed.
Right.
God designed us to function and thrive and flourish in mutually interconnected, meaningful relationships. We live in a society that is the most connected in human history. There's never been more opportunity to know people in human history because of social media, the digital world, than currently in 2023. However, we also live in the loneliest society in human history. Here's a few stats that are interesting. There was a Harvard study recently. It said, our report suggests that 36% of all Americans, including 61% of young adults, I'll just sit in that for a second, and 51% of mothers with young children feel serious loneliness. Another study by Pew Research stated, in the most recent survey, 46% of adults said that they felt depressed at least 1 or 2 days during the past week, and 42% said they felt lonely. That's an epidemic.
It's so sad.
I mean, the fact that 61% of young adults in our culture are seriously lonely in a culture that has so many connections but is lacking the deep, meaningful, mutual, interdependent relationships. Connections is not what God designed. Like even, all those reality shows on relationships, they're like, we're connected. I feel a connection with you. I'm like, what does that mean? You feel a connection. Like, we were designed to flourish through relational intimacy below the surface. And I'd love to just touch on that. Like, what do you think are healthy traits of a relationship that causes flourishing?
Yeah. I think what you just mentioned, the mutuality, relationships should be mutually beneficial. It shouldn't be one-sided. If it's one-sided, then you're dealing with an infant or a baby. They only get from you. They don't really give anything until they're about, 1 year old, and then they start to give back. But there's a mutual nature to relationships that has to happen where both individuals are benefiting and growing and being challenged and enjoying one another's company. So mutuality, I think, is a big aspect of relationships, that when there is mutuality, then that's when the relationship can flourish.
That's good.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree with that. The mutuality, it being two-sided, is so important. And then, I think about some of the verses we've already referenced when it comes to relationship. Someone who can rejoice with you, rejoice with those who rejoice. Someone who can mourn with you, mourn with those who mourn. Someone who is willing to carry a burden with you, and vice versa, us becoming people who can carry burdens with others. And then I think of the fruits of the Spirit. Perhaps that can be a guidepost as well. When I'm figuring out how to invest more fully in my relationships, I hope that I'm a person that shows love, that shares in joy, that does my best to honestly bring peace, to be gentle, to be kind, to practice that self-control, because many of those fruits of the Spirit truly would create some healthy guidelines and boundaries for the way that we treat others in our lives, but also the way that we ask to be treated by others, the way that we identify who's going to be a hopeful and a helpful friend for me. Who do I have the honor and privilege of loving and being loved by?
Yeah.
good.
I love that you mentioned how can you be with someone who can, when you're sad, they're sad. There's this matching that happens. Brene Brown talks about it in her book, Atlas of the Heart. That
I
one of
love
the
that
things
one.
that she tried to teach her daughters was that when you have friends and something good happens to you, do they celebrate you or do you notice them getting jealous? And she said that kind of should raise a red flag for you. If they can't match your same mood, it demonstrates that the friendship is probably not mutually beneficial.
Yeah, and I think with healthy relationships, you want to be able to feel safe enough to be vulnerable. And in all of that
So
that you're
important.
talking about is vulnerability and feeling like that there's a space for that. Also, that there's conflict in healthy relationships.
Yes,
Absolutely.
there is that
Right?
truthfulness.
Yes, because you care about that person, there could be some tension there. Maybe you're having to hear some hard things, or maybe you're having to say or do some hard things that can elicit a reaction that wasn't supposed to be there, or maybe it's just bumping heads. So healthy relationships do have moments of tension, but it's a commitment and care towards one another that sustains the relationship. But also, even in that conflict, recognizing what is healthy conflict and unhealthy conflict.
Right.
You know, do you feel stripped of your dignity or self-respect
Yes.
in that conflict? Is there some sort of, is there an element of that conflict that devalues you? Then those become a red flag, which I do want to put a caveat to that, in that while I want to normalize conflict in relationships, but some of you may have a unique aspect where there's abuse that's showing up in that relationship. And if you are in an abusive relationship, whether that involves physical abuse, sexual abuse, spiritual abuse, financial abuse, there's many different types of abuse, then at that point, that requires a more intensive form of attention, and you should seek support. There are so many great resources out there at the local church and community centers that will come alongside you, not only to provide moral and emotional support, but to actually provide you with logistical, physical support that you need in order to navigate those waters.
Yeah. The word that came to mind as you're talking about that, which is very important, is boundaries. That another important aspect of relationships is making sure that we set good boundaries. And oftentimes when boundaries are breached, it's an indication that something needs to change about the relationship. If you're looking for resources on that, Henry Cloud writes about boundaries.
Yeah.
I'm sure two of you know other books, but that's the one that comes to mind when we think about boundaries.
Yeah. I think another word for a healthy trait in a relationship is shared meaning. Like they're meaningful. Like sometimes our relationships are so transactional, right? One person is being invested in, one person's finding meaning, but another person's not. And I think a healthy, flourishing relationship has shared meaning. There's vision together. There's investment. Each person is investing in the relationship, and it's forming you in a positive and healthy and flourishing way. And I even think, like, just focusing on followers of Jesus, if that relationship is not helping you to flourish as a follower of Jesus, that's an indicator that you need to be aware of, because in the Christian community, we're all going to fail each other, right? Like we're all flawed. Every relationship is flawed. That's why there's a lot of rub. The Bible says as iron sharpens iron, which means there's going to be rub in a relationship.
Yes.
But ultimately, even within the reality of our own messiness and flaws and failures, there should be a development that is sharpening us in a healthy way, which leads to conflict, right? Like conflict is healthy. Like some people are so conflict averse. They're like, no conflict. Oh, we're getting married. We should never have an argument. No, it's normal.
Right.
Like you got two sinners, two flawed people in the same context 24/7. Like you're going to have conflict. And conflict shouldn't be an opportunity to assault the person. Conflict should be an opportunity to conversate in a healthy way around that issue so that both of you get better, or there's a resolving or healing or awareness around whatever, that conflict is dealing with. So I think one thing that I've learned is don't attack the person. Attack the problem,
Right.
or attack the issue.
Yes.
When we start shaming people or assaulting their identity and worth, we're going after the very element that God created. Like the image of God in a person. Let's not do that. That's an unhealthy trait that can be, that can be detrimental to a person's well-being and mental health in a relationship.
Yeah, thinking about conflict, two words come to mind for me, and it is humility and accountability.
That's good, Casey.
And the reason being, I think those two quality traits harnessed within ourselves, and hopefully we're looking at for others too, it gives us the ability to enter into that conflict with this openness of, how did I contribute to this? What can I do to grow? But then hopefully we're looking for other people who have that same humility and curiosity so that we can together solve the problem rather than be turning on one another and creating distance in the relationship or a fear of conflict that could actually be an invitation to deeper connection if done with boundaries and guardrails like we've talked about.
Yeah, that's good. What are some other unhealthy traits? So like attacking the person, shaming somebody, that can be destructive to a person's well-being in a relationship. Things to stay clear of, things not to do.
Defensiveness, I think, would rank pretty high on the list. I think part of being in a relationship with someone is their ability to be candid with you, to let you know when there are things that are happening that you should avoid, that you should look out for, or a point in your own life where you're kind of falling short. And so if an individual displays a lot of defensiveness, you can't tell them something without them getting super defensive. That probably should raise a flag and would make the relationship difficult.
Faithful are the wounds of a friend.
There you go.
Yeah. Proverbs.
Yeah. And what that proverb is getting at is the fact that a friend at times will wound you, but the wound isn't for the purpose of killing you. The wound is for the purpose of you improving and getting better. If someone breaks a bone and a doctor has to go in and give them surgery, there are going to be wounds that are left over. Why? Because somebody was there attuned to where the break happened and were helping to get you back together and get you to a whole place. So yeah, a friend at time will wound you. But you don't have surgery every day, so you don't need to wound as a friend every day as well.
Be thoughtful and
100%.
careful and gentle. Stephanie, what are some other unhealthy traits that people should steer clear of?
Controlling or managing each other. Recognizing that, yes, we're there to mutually benefit from one another, grow and say hard things, but also accepting that we're all autonomous creatures that have the will of God in us and our own unique experiences. And so there's going to be shortcomings that come with that. And not feeling like we have to constantly be fine-tuning someone to turn into something that we think they should be. And when we're imposing our own views of how we desire, even if that's coming from a place of love, how we desire to be, just remember our role in this, and that we are not God, we are not the Savior. We did not create these people in the womb, in their mother's womb, that we are coming alongside them with playing a specific role and just recognizing our limitations.
I'd want to bring up another one that I think the two of you probably can speak of a little better than I can: codependency.
Yeah.
Why should that be avoided in a relationship? When do you know that's happening in a relationship? What does it look like?
Well, I think it's complicated because often this is happening because one person is very much experiencing pain or suffering, maybe in their relationship to substances, or it could be in their relationship to many different things. Codependency is also often used in relationship to substance use, but it could be a variety of things that one person in the relationship is having a difficulty with. And then the other person in the relationship wants to be deeply connected to their partner or their friend. And so sometimes they'll find themselves enabling the unhealthy practices of the other because the function of that action keeps both people connected. Even if they're connected in a way that is painful to both of them, it still keeps them connected. So I share that to offer compassion for people who've noticed I have that trait sometimes to not ask for what I need in the relationship, or to not set clear boundaries, or to not work towards change that I'd really like to work towards because I just so deeply want to be connected to the person that I love. you have our compassion. We recognize that, of course, we all want that love. It is so hard. And like we've talked about in relationships, a part of growing healthfully together is we do have to practice that honesty and accountability that sometimes leads to disruption temporarily, disruption in the connection temporarily, some conflict for the sake of creating a more healing and hopeful relationship in the future.
It's very good.
Dr. Caine, what would you add?
That was phenomenal. I would say we have fundamental needs as individuals and fundamental needs in relationships. And sometimes what happens is when our fundamental needs as individuals aren't being met, we seek for that being met in the relationship. And when that doesn't fit because it wasn't designed for that to happen there, then all of a sudden we start having conflict with one another because the person's not meeting the expectation. So for example, there's some overlap where as individuals we have the fundamental need to socialize, to have relationships with other people outside of the relationship, have fun and do maybe have hobbies as individuals, even with no one else, just having those times. And what happens if you find yourself in a situation where you're not making that connection with other people and you're not having as much joy there? And maybe that's an area of neglect that needs to be worked on. But then you go inside and put more weight on your partner, your friend, or whatever, that one person who you have in your life to meet all of those needs, and how frustrating that can be when that's not being met.
Yeah. I was just thinking about the life of Jesus. He was selfless, which is a healthy trait in a relationship. Selfless. I mean, he gave himself for the good and flourishing of other people, but he also practiced self-care. So he took care of his own needs. Like he cared about other people and he invested in their life, but he also went away on a consistent basis to replenish, to refill. That's an interesting concept because like some people say, oh, you can't, you can all either be selfless or selfish, and they equate selfishness with like investing in yourself. I think any flourishing relationship has to have self-care individually.
Yes.
Like whatever you love to do that replenishes your soul, fills you up, and it can be totally different. And I think I love that you point that out, to give people the space and place to invest in their own stewardship and well-being. Because if you love others as you love yourself, if you love yourself well, you'll love others well.
Right.
Absolutely. Yes.
And if you don't love yourself well, you'll never be able to love other people well.
I think as we're taking a couple steps back here, talking about loneliness, that some people just don't know how to make a friend. And so I'll give you 3 easy things. Again, I don't want to just say, do this and you'll have 100 friends tomorrow. No, but these are just some practical things that you can do to make friends. 1, show interest. Show interest in other people. When you have a conversation with someone, if you're doing all the talking, then you're not showing interest in others. People love to talk about themselves. Ask them what their story is. What do they enjoy doing? Show interest in others. The second thing is have mutual interest. Find people who like doing the things that you like to do. I'm a golfer. When I moved to Sacramento, I met some other golfers, and that helped me build some friends. C.S. Lewis said it this way, that at the foundational level of being a friend is this phrase, what? You too? Oh, I like that as well. And what he's saying is you can find people who have mutual interest, and that's what finding a friend is like. Like, what? You enjoy doing X, Y, and Z? Man, I love doing that as well.
Did you just quote C.S. Lewis?
I did.
Wow. This is a moment.
On friendship.
This is a moment.
Yeah. And then the last one is like take up new interest. Find something brand new to do that you normally wouldn't do. It gets you out of your circle and get you out of confinement. And I think if you do those 3 things, you'll begin to forge relationships that are on a base level of something that's very practical, things that you enjoy doing.
Yeah. I think this is a really pragmatic conversation. Anything else that you'd want to add to this conversation?
No.
That's good.
Yeah.
I think this is really good. I think there's a lot of tangible things people can process through. Thank you for bringing up abuse, because I think that's a reality for a lot of people. It's far more common than people recognize.
Right.
And to be able to give some examples of types of abuse. Abuse is not just physical, it's not just sexual. It could be financial, it could be verbal, it could be emotional. So there's different types of abuse, and so I appreciate you bringing that up. But
I will add one thing, Wes. I just thought about this. If you are experiencing some level of loneliness and life is hard for you, I want to encourage you, if you're a person who decides to follow after Jesus, to pray and ask God to help you find friends.
That's
I
good.
think sometimes we're so reluctant to pray certain things because it sounds so selfish, but God cares about your relationships deeply.
Yes.
Jesus in Luke chapter 6, before he chooses his disciples, we're told that he goes away and prays, and the next morning he chooses his disciples, chooses his friends. He's spending time with God doing that. So pray. Don't be afraid to pray
Yeah.
and ask God to send you friends.
So good. Proverbs 12:26 says, choose your friends carefully. So prayer is probably a really good practice to
Yeah.
enter into the
Yes.
careful, finding the people that are going to influence your life should take some thoughtfulness and care.
Absolutely.
And it's also proactive, like being a part of a local church, enter into a community group. Or some sort of small group, whatever your church calls them, communities, gospel groups, small groups, whatever it is. Like enter into that. It might be intimidating. It's vulnerable to enter into new relational spheres, but it's worth it
Yeah.
because you can only thrive in relationships. Serving, like we serve together. We become really good friends because we serve together. When you are doing something purposeful that's good with another human being in like a partnership of mission, it's amazing the depth of relationship that's built just through that proximity in those relationships. So find some practical ways that you can engage with other people in proximity to build relationships. That's why I love the local church. The local church is a place that should highlight and be an opportunity to build relationships that flourish beyond the surface level, beyond like, who won the Warriors game or who won the Lakers game or who won the football game.
Look at the weather today.
That's all good.
Yeah.
But you can get below that in
Yeah.
the local church.
Yeah.
Our soul is craving more than just the surface. We want to be loved and we want to be known. And we want to be loved being fully known.
Absolutely.
And I think that's a beautiful thing that we're all craving. And I just truly believe that the church is the place to find that, because ultimately it's a place that we connect on the deepest core level of our relationship with God and the redemption, the story of our life through Jesus. It's just a beautiful thing. So I want to encourage you, if you're not a part of a local church, try it out. If you're in this community, go to Jason Caine's church. It's amazing. And he's an amazing communicator. But find a healthy local church that can provide some relational connection and support in your life. You need it. It's the way you're wired and designed. If you're not a follower of Jesus, believe in Jesus, reorient your life to how he designed you to flourish and function. And if you're a follower of Jesus and you've just been disconnected, this might be a really good time to get reconnected. There are better days ahead for you relationally, and we're so glad that you joined us to have this conversation. And thank you guys. You guys are absolutely amazing.